Hey there! Ready to dive into some Buddhist philosophy?
Sure am.
We're tackling this concept of becoming today.
Oh, interesting.
Exploring how, our desires and attachments shape our experiences, not just in this life, but potentially beyond.
I see.
And we're going to be looking at a chapter that focuses on the four clingings, which are basically ways we get stuck, hindering our freedom and happiness.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
We often chase things, experiences, even identities, thinking they'll bring us happiness.
Right.
But according to Buddhist thought, it's this very clinging that keeps us from true liberation.
It's like, we're constantly reaching for the next thing.
Yeah.
Always thinking, if I just had this, then I'll be happy.
Exactly.
So how does this becoming thing actually work? The chapter mentions this concept of karma, which I've heard of but never fully understood.
Karma is essentially the law of cause and effect. It suggests that our actions, thoughts, and intentions create ripples that shape our future experiences, not just in this life, but potentially in future lives as well.
I see.
Think of it this way. Every action we take is like planting a seed.
Okay.
Those seeds will eventually sprout, shaping the landscape of our lives.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the things that we cling to now
Right.
could be setting us up for future experiences.
Yes.
For better or worse.
For better or worse, exactly.
But how do our desires actually shape who we are? The chapter mentions these 5 aggregates as being important.
Yeah.
What are those exactly?
The 5 aggregates are kind of like the building blocks of our experience.
Okay.
They are form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness.
Okay.
They're not static things, though, but processes that are constantly in flux.
So it's not that we are these 5 things, but they're how we experience the world and create our sense of self.
Right. And according to Buddhist philosophy, our craving for these aggregates, our clinging to them as me or mine, is what keeps us bound to this cycle of becoming.
That makes me think of that saying. You are not your thoughts.
Right.
If we can detach from these aggregates, would that be a step toward liberation?
That's a great connection.
Yeah.
It's definitely in line with the idea that freedom comes from letting go.
Okay.
And this brings us to the 4 clingings.
Okay.
These are the 4 ways our craving manifests, each one creating its own kind of limitation.
Okay, let's break them down.
Sure.
First up is sensuality clinging.
Okay.
I'm guessing this is about more than just indulging in, pleasures.
You're right. Sensuality in this context goes beyond just physical pleasure.
Okay.
It's about getting attached to any kind of sense-based experience.
Right.
Whether it's a beautiful sight, a delicious taste, or even a pleasant sound.
So it's about getting hooked on the feeling itself.
Exactly.
On wanting more and more.
Exactly. It's that craving, that grasping that leads to the problem.
The chapter actually uses a pretty strong analogy to illustrate this.
Yeah.
Comparing us to a beetle obsessed with dung.
Right.
It seems a bit extreme, but I think I get the point.
That's a striking image, right?
Yeah.
The idea is that even seemingly base desires can completely consume us if we let them, making us overlook other aspects of life.
Right.
The text also states that if one stays obsessed with form, that's what one is measured limited by. Whatever one is measured by, that's how one is classified.
Okay.
So whatever we cling to ends up defining and limiting us.
That makes me think about how we often define ourselves by the things we desire. Like, I'm a foodie or I'm a fashionista.
Right.
Are we limiting ourselves by getting caught up in these labels?
That's a great observation. It definitely highlights how our desires can shape our identity and even our perception of the world.
But if everyone experiences these desires to some degree, what's the problem with enjoying things? The text can't be saying we should all become ascetics and deny ourselves any pleasure.
No, it's not about complete denial.
Okay.
It's more about understanding the potential pitfalls of clinging to fleeting sensory experiences.
Right.
They might offer temporary satisfaction, but can they truly bring lasting happiness?
Right.
The text uses the analogy of a person with a leaky boat.
Okay.
Constantly scooping out water, but never able to fully enjoy the ride.
So it's like always chasing that next hit of pleasure or excitement, but never feeling truly fulfilled.
Exactly. And the text doesn't sugarcoat the potential consequences of this kind of clinging.
Okay.
It compares those consumed by sensual craving to a mangy jackal.
Okay.
Restlessly searching,
right,
but finding no peace. There's also a pretty detailed description of the dangers and anxieties that come with chasing wealth and power.
Okay, that's a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah.
So it's not about becoming totally indifferent to pleasure.
Right.
But about recognizing that true happiness doesn't come from chasing those fleeting experiences.
Right. It's about cultivating a sense of contentment and peace that's not dependent on external things.
All right. That's a lot to think about already, and we're just getting started.
I know, right?
Let's move on to the next clinging, view clinging.
Okay.
This one sounds a bit more abstract.
It is, but it's equally powerful in how it shapes our reality.
Okay.
View clinging refers to our attachment to specific viewpoints, ideologies, or dogmas.
So it's like being stubborn and refusing to see other perspectives?
That's definitely part of it.
Okay.
But it goes deeper than just being closed-minded.
Okay.
It's about how clinging to certain beliefs can actually limit our understanding and create conflict.
Can you give an example of how this might play out in real life?
Imagine someone so attached to their political beliefs that they can't even have a civil conversation with someone who holds different views.
Okay, yeah.
They might interpret everything through the lens of their ideology.
Oh, right.
Even if it distorts reality.
Okay. I can definitely see how that could be a problem.
Yeah.
Does the text mention any specific examples of this kind of view clinging?
Yes, there's a passage that describes people clinging to their doctrines.
Okay.
Arguing in assemblies.
All right.
And craving praise.
Right.
But ultimately failing to find true purity.
Okay.
It highlights how clinging to the need to be right can hinder genuine learning and growth.
So it's like being so focused on winning the argument that you miss out on the opportunity to actually understand the other person's perspective.
Exactly. And this clinging to wrong views, especially about the nature of reality and the self, can have some serious consequences.
Like what? What kind of consequences are we talking about?
Well, for starters, it can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies.
Okay.
If you believe you're destined for a negative outcome, your actions and choices might actually make that outcome more likely.
Oh, wow.
The text even says that believing you're destined for hell could lead you there.
Okay.
Not because of some divine punishment, but because that belief shapes your actions.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is.
It makes me think about the law of attraction.
Yeah.
And how our beliefs can influence our reality.
It's like a powerful connection.
Yeah.
The text also provides the story of Anathapindika, a wealthy merchant who encountered various wanderers with conflicting views. He sought guidance from the Buddha, who pointed out that these conflicting viewpoints stemmed from inappropriate attention, meaning they were blindly following others without critically examining the validity of their claims.
Ouch. I'm sure we've all been guilty of that at some point.
Probably.
So how do we avoid falling into the trap of clinging to wrong views? It can't be easy to constantly question everything we believe.
It's definitely a process, but the text emphasizes the importance of cultivating right view. This involves understanding the true nature of reality, the causes of suffering, and the path to liberation. It requires critical thinking, self-reflection, and a willingness to examine our beliefs, honestly.
That sounds like a lifelong endeavor.
It is.
But before we get too overwhelmed, let's move on to the third clinging, habit and practice clinging. This one seems a bit trickier since habits can be both good and bad.
It is nuanced. It's not about the habits or practices themselves, but our attachment to them. Especially when it leads to a sense of superiority or judgment toward others.
So even good habits can be a problem if we're clinging to them too tightly.
Imagine someone who's incredibly dedicated to their meditation practice. Which is great in itself. But they start looking down on others who don't meditate as much or in the same way. That judgment, that sense of, I'm better than you because of my practice. That's where the clinging comes in.
I've definitely seen that kind of attitude in spiritual circles.
Yeah.
It's almost like the ego finds a way to sneak in, even when we're trying to be mindful and compassionate.
That's a keen observation.
Yeah.
The text actually highlights this point with an example of people clinging to the idea of being reborn as a Devan.
Oh, wow.
A celestial being.
Right.
Because of their specific practices.
So they might be doing good deeds.
Right.
But for the wrong reasons.
Precisely. Their motivation is still rooted in attachment, in this case, attachment to a specific outcome.
It seems like even spiritual aspirations can be a form of clinging if we're not careful.
They can.
Are there other examples of this habit and practice clinging that might be more relatable?
Definitely. The text tells a story of a person of no integrity.
Okay.
Who, despite attaining high meditative states, still looks down on others for not sharing their specific practices.
That's a good point.
It is.
It seems like humility is a key ingredient in any spiritual path.
It definitely plays a crucial role.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see how even seemingly positive habits and practices can become problematic if we get too attached to them.
Exactly.
All right, ready to tackle the final clinging, self-doctrine clinging.
Let's do it.
This one sounds like it's going to get deep.
It does. This is where we delve into how we construct our sense of self and how that creates limitations.
Okay.
It's about clinging to specific ideas about who we are, whether we're asserting a solid self or denying its existence.
Wait, so even denying the self is a form of clinging?
You've hit on a common misunderstanding.
Okay.
While the Buddha did teach not self, it's often oversimplified.
Okay.
He wasn't just refuting one specific view of the self.
Right.
He was challenging the entire notion of clinging to any fixed idea about who we are.
So it's not about finding the right doctrine about the self, but about seeing through the entire concept of a fixed self.
Exactly. The Buddha addressed various ways people define the self: form, formless, finite, infinite, and so on.
Okay.
To show that any fixed view leads to suffering.
Right.
It's the clinging, the grasping onto a particular definition that's the problem.
But how does clinging to a specific self-doctrine actually lead to suffering? What does that look like in practice?
Think about it this way. When we cling to the idea of a separate, independent self, it creates a sense of isolation and fear.
Okay.
We worry about protecting this self, about losing it, about not being good enough.
Right.
This fear and insecurity can manifest in countless ways, from constantly seeking validation to getting defensive when our beliefs are challenged.
So it's like our attachment to a fixed sense of self creates all this unnecessary anxiety and suffering.
Exactly. And the text highlights this with a poignant quote.
Okay.
Monks, you would do well to cling to that self-doctrine clinging to which there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair.
Wow.
But do you see a self-doctrine clinging to which there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair?
And of course the answer is
no, Lord. There is no self-doctrine, no fixed view of the self that doesn't ultimately lead to some form of suffering.
That's a pretty clear statement.
It is.
But how do we break free from this self-doctrine clinging? If even denying the self is a form of clinging, it seems like we're stuck in a catch-22.
It's a common dilemma.
Right.
But the path to liberation lies in developing right understanding.
Okay.
This involves seeing through the illusion of self, recognizing its impermanent and interdependent nature.
So it's not about finding a new, better definition of the self, but about letting go of the need to define it altogether.
Exactly.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get a glimpse of what that might mean.
Yeah.
Even if it's still a bit mind-boggling.
It can be.
But before we go any further, you mentioned some stories about how clinging to the wrong view of the self can lead to some pretty unfortunate rebirths.
Yeah.
I'm definitely curious to hear about those. So these stories about wrong views leading to unfortunate rebirths, what are they all about?
Well, one of the most striking examples is the story of the dog practice ascetic.
Okay.
He believed that imitating the behavior of a dog, eating scraps, barking, sleeping on the ground, would guarantee him a favorable rebirth.
Wow, that's quite a commitment. But it sounds a bit like those habit and practice folks we talked about earlier, just with a canine twist.
You're right to connect those ideas. Yeah. But the Buddha points out that it's not the outward actions that determine rebirth. It's the underlying intention and understanding.
Okay.
The ascetic was so fixated on becoming a specific being that he missed the point entirely.
So mimicking a dog wouldn't automatically make you come back as one.
Exactly. It's not about blindly copying behaviors. The text says that if the ascetic truly cultivated a dog mind, devoid of human understanding, then rebirth as a dog would be likely.
Right.
But if his actions were driven by wrong views, like believing those actions would earn him a heavenly rebirth, then a much less pleasant outcome awaited him.
That's a pretty stark example of how clinging to the wrong ideas can backfire, even if you're putting in a lot of effort.
It is.
And it highlights that it's not just about the actions themselves, but the understanding behind them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a reminder that we can't game the system, so to speak.
Right.
True liberation comes from genuine understanding, not from trying to manipulate our way into a better rebirth.
Okay, so dog guy aside.
Right.
Are there other examples of how clinging to the wrong view of the self can lead to a less than ideal rebirth?
Oh, yes, several.
Okay.
There's the story of the actor who was convinced that because he brought joy to others through his performances, he was guaranteed a rebirth in a heavenly realm of laughter.
Okay, a heavenly realm of laughter.
Okay.
That actually doesn't sound too bad.
It sounds fun on the surface, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the Buddha explains that the actor, by focusing on evoking strong emotions in his audience, was actually strengthening their attachments.
So even if his intentions were good to make people happy, he was inadvertently causing harm.
Exactly. And since the actor himself was caught up in those same attachments, seeking validation and praise, his actions led to a less desirable rebirth, a hellish realm reflecting the distorted, clinging nature of that laughter.
That's pretty mind-blowing. It really brings home the point that even seemingly positive actions can have unintended consequences if they're rooted in the wrong understanding.
It does, doesn't it? It's all about intention and understanding.
Yeah.
The Buddha isn't saying we should never perform or entertain.
Right.
It's about being aware of the potential impact of our actions and ensuring they align with wholesome intentions.
So it's more about cultivating a sense of awareness and responsibility for the ripple effects of our actions.
Absolutely.
Even seemingly small ones.
And the texts provide one more example to drive this point home.
Right.
The story of a warrior who believed that dying heroically in battle would earn him a place in a heavenly realm of warriors.
Okay, given his profession, that one seems almost understandable.
Right.
But I bet there's a twist.
Of course. The Buddha explains that this warrior, by engaging in battle with a mind full of violence and the desire to harm, was actually creating negative karma.
So even a noble death can be problematic if your heart isn't in the right place.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences.
Right.
Both for ourselves and others. And that our mental state plays a huge role in shaping those consequences.
All right, so we've explored these four clingings to sensuality, views, habits and practices, and self-doctrines.
Yeah.
It seems like they're all interconnected in some way, right?
They are.
Like one clinging feeds into another.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
The text specifically points out that views, habits, and self-doctrines all influence each other, creating this complex web of clinging.
It's like a tangled mess of desires and attachments. No wonder it's so hard to break free.
It can feel overwhelming, for sure.
Yeah.
But the Buddha doesn't just point out the problem. He offers a solution.
Right.
And that solution lies in understanding cause and effect.
Right.
The principle of karma.
Right, karma. We touched on it earlier, but how does understanding this concept actually help us break free from these clingings?
By seeing clearly how our actions, both mental and physical, create specific results, we can start to make different choices.
Right.
We can stop clinging to the things that ultimately cause us suffering.
Right.
And cultivate qualities that lead to greater freedom and happiness.
Okay, so it's not just about understanding karma intellectually, but about actually applying it to our lives.
Yeah.
Making conscious choices that align with our deepest values and aspirations.
Exactly. Okay. It's about moving from a reactive state of clinging to a more mindful and intentional way of being.
All right, so the big takeaway here is clinging in all its forms creates limitations.
Yeah.
And true freedom comes from letting go.
It does.
But if all our clinging leads to suffering, what does true liberation, that end of becoming, actually look and feel like?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. We've spent this whole episode talking about what to let go of.
Right.
But what remains when that process is complete?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The text offers some clues describing true liberation as a state of peace, bliss, and unshakable freedom.
So it's not just the absence of suffering, but a positive, joyful state of being.
Exactly. It's a state of being fully present and awake, responsive to the ever-changing flow of experience without getting caught up in it.
That sounds almost paradoxical, being fully engaged in life, but not attached to any particular outcome.
Right.
Is that even possible?
It might seem that way.
Yeah.
But the texts assure us that it is.
Okay.
It's a state of perfect balance and equanimity, free from the extremes of clinging and aversion.
Okay, I'm definitely adding that to my list of things to contemplate.
Good.
But before we get too lost in the philosophical weeds, there was one point you mentioned earlier that I wanted to circle back to. You said there's an exception to the rule that all self-doctrines lead to stress.
Right.
What's that all about?
You have a good memory.
Thanks.
Yeah, there's one very specific exception to the self-doctrine problem.
Okay.
The text, specifically the Majjhima Nikaya, states that if a monk correctly understands the concept of not self and integrates that understanding into their meditation practice, it can actually lead to particular meditative attainments.
So in this case, understanding not self isn't about clinging to a doctrine, but using it as a tool for deeper spiritual growth.
Exactly.
Okay.
It becomes a means to see through the illusion of a fixed self and experience a more profound level of freedom.
Okay.
But, and this is crucial, the text warns that even this correct understanding can become a subtle form of clinging if we're not careful.
It seems like there's a real danger of getting attached to even the most positive spiritual experiences.
There is.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap?
It's a constant process of refinement and self-awareness.
Right.
The text emphasizes that even if you achieve the highest meditative states, clinging to them will still keep you bound to the cycle of becoming.
Okay.
True liberation requires continuous letting go.
Right.
Even of the things we might consider good or beneficial.
That makes me think about those spiritual teachers who achieve incredible states of awareness, but then their ego gets inflated and they end up causing harm.
Yeah.
It's like a cautionary tale about how even the most advanced practitioners can get lost if they're not careful.
It's a valuable reminder that the path to liberation is not about achieving some static state of perfection, but an ongoing journey of self-discovery and letting go.
So if we're not supposed to cling to even the most positive spiritual experiences, what are we supposed to do with them? How do we integrate them into our lives without getting attached?
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
Right.
The key is to appreciate those experiences for what they are. Glimpses of a deeper reality, but not to grasp onto them as defining who we are.
So it's like enjoying a beautiful sunset. Without feeling the need to possess it or hold on to it, we can appreciate the beauty and the experience without making it part of our identity or attaching our happiness to it.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Thanks.
It captures the essence of non-attachment.
Okay.
It's about allowing those experiences to flow through us without creating a sense of ownership or clinging.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get a sense of what true liberation might look like, even if it's still a bit mind-boggling.
It can be.
It's not about achieving some fixed state of perfection, but about being completely present and free in each moment, no matter what's happening.
That's a wonderful way to put it.
Thanks.
It brings us back to that central question the text poses.
Okay.
What does true liberation, the end of becoming, actually look and feel like?
Right.
We may not have all the answers.
Right.
But exploring these teachings helps us to ask the right questions and move in the right direction.
It's like we're starting to see the contours of the map, even if we haven't arrived at the destination yet.
Exactly.
And the journey itself is just as important as the destination, right?
Absolutely. The beauty of the Buddhist path is that it provides us with practices and insights that can help us navigate this complex terrain of becoming.
Right.
And ultimately lead us to a place of true freedom and awakening.
All right, deep divers, that's our deep dive into the concept of becoming and the four clingings. We hope this exploration has given you some food for thought, and maybe even inspired you to look at your own desires and attachments with a fresh perspective.
And remember, the path to liberation is an ongoing journey.
Right.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep letting go.
Until next time, keep diving.